Welcome to FIL Your Boots. Covering critical times of the season, FIL hosts industry experts, colleagues, and most importantly, local farmers like yourself, bringing you useful insights and different perspectives to help you drive performance on farm. I'm Ben Murphy, National Sales Manager for FIL, and today we're talking about heat detection. Our guest today is Craig Lowry from GEA. Welcome, Craig. Tell us a bit about your background, your role now, and what you're focusing on.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for having me here. So currently I'm employed with GEA Farm Technologies, and I'm the head of sales and service for dairy equipment. So really looking at the domestic market in terms of obviously new shed opportunities, but also service and consumables in terms of that general milking support environment. Really focusing on milk harvesting and really getting the best outcome for farmers in terms of production. Prior to this role, I spent some time with Waikato Milking Systems, again looking after the domestic market in Australia, and prior to that spent a fair bit of time with LIC in the automation team. Yeah. That was a really, I suppose, pivotal role for me in terms of bedding that appetite for technology. My role there was looking after the ProTrack team for New Zealand, and then sense the technology for Australia. I think with the herd management element of dairy farming, and certainly what technology provided, you could see the evolution in terms of, number one, the technology uptake, the demand for farmers essentially around understanding their production, understanding down to an individual animal level, and really being able to tweak those inputs in terms of feed and farm management to get the best outcome from your animals. And I did a stint prior to that with Meridian, the energy company, and that was focusing again on dairy farms and the electricity usage and trying to mitigate some of those on-farm costs. So a fairly wide base of experience, but more so technology based.
So that technology obviously is your passion now. I can see it in your face, that technology side. Now let's go back to probably your LIC days, or even the roles you're now. Since I was a young fella, all we talked about was empty rate. Yep. That was it, just empty rate. Mm. Obviously, we've decided that empty rate isn't a true indication of what we've got. So now we have 6-week in calf rate, we have 3-week submission rates, we have not in calf rate. What should we be focusing on, probably, as a farmer? Yeah,
so I suppose this will always be the debatable question. Yeah. You've got Dairy NZ and other entities within the wider industry. If you look at New Zealand, we hover around that 65% 6-week in calf rate, and I suppose you look at all the variables that affect that, and how can we influence? How can we ultimately get a better datum in terms of that point? And that's, I think, where technology does have a large piece to play. But having said that, you've got a number of other variables which are really driving the market, such things in terms of skill of labour. We've got an ageing farmer population base out there. Yeah. How do you attract the right people to the farm? We don't have this environment, where kids are essentially coming out of school and looking for a role within the dairy industry. So you've got all these different variables which we're trying to manage, and all of them, when you overlay that and put that into the melting pot, we're looking for trying to come up with the most accurate view of essentially that mating process, which arguably is the most important period in terms of that piece on the farm. So I suppose going back to where does that in calf rate get influence from? You've got all of these different inputs, and that's I suppose we're looking at that from some of those key drivers, and then you have how does technology support that, and certainly you've got even when you look at resource-wise, the ability not only to recruit labour, but good labour. Also, you look at other things which have started not creeping in but becoming more and more prevalent, such as split calving. And there you look at that scenario where it's another element of essentially resource drain on the farm. So again, understanding how important heat detection in that mating cycle is, but at the same time you've got all these different variables which are affecting ultimately the success.
Going back to what you're right, there's so many elements to it to get it right. And I remember, and I probably still have a few farms today, the ageing farmer is still out there doing mating by himself. And on some of our farms we look after, mating is actually almost going till January the 7th. So it's an awful long time of mating. I read an article from Dairy NZ that was quite stoked that the in-calf rate are going up from 67.3 to 67.6, and I look at that and go 0.3. But what should farmers and their team be taking to identify more heats?
I think number one, it's about having a plan. So looking at what is actually going to be the plan for mating, and as you've said, there's a quite a drawn out process, and especially if that ends up someone essentially standing on platform or trying to identify heats for a 12-13 week period. There you do get burnout, and especially in a larger herd environment, that's a massive amount of workload to ultimately have on one person. And I think that's the key point. A lot of the time that comes down to one person who's responsible for that. So when I talk about having a plan, obviously it's about how do you identify the readiness essentially of your herd for mating. Firstly, from a health perspective, and that's certainly where you're working with what FIL does. A very important part of that process, making sure animals are healthy. Obviously, a healthier animal is more likely to get pregnant. But from there, what can you do around the accuracy of identifying heats, and that's where certainly from a technology perspective, we certainly have a product offering that supports that, but also from the wider FIL perspective with regards to your markers and that sort of thing. Again, but it's going with a really clear plan of how that's going to work, and understanding what is the outcome you're looking for. Is there to pinpoint those heats? Is there a sex semen piece as well? Is the plan also to actually really tighten that calving pattern? As you just said, a long drawn out mating will end up into a long drawn out calving, and again they're just all resource constraints or resource burns that happen on farm. So I think if you're again talking to those, whether it be consultant or farm advisors, and really having a good idea of what you want to achieve, and then setting early that plan in place, and certainly from some of the work we've done around technology, I can't sort of underestimate the need to understand the cycling of that herd and its readiness for mating. And if you can get 2 or 3 cycles in advance and really get a clean view of it, again, have a plan for those non-cycling girls. In environments where you do have split calving, at least there's an ability to essentially put those animals into the next mob. But all things to consider.
I think you touched on it, but one of the key areas is team. There's no I in team, as they say. But if I look at some of the farms I look after, which have a very good in-calf rate, those guys have got notebooks on them all the time. They're recording numbers. It's not just left up to one person to recognise tail paint or whatever. It's an overall let's buy into it sort of thing, and I see that working. But I mean, what we've got to understand is our younger generation is not getting trained as well as they used to. Okay, and so how do you think the adoption for new technology has influenced any decisions on the farm?
So what we're seeing is, number one, there's certainly an appetite for it. Firstly, from a perspective of accuracy, in terms of heat detection, you are picking that optimal window for insemination. And again, if you look at some of those other factors which have driven the market, the uptake in terms of AB, obviously AB is larger and larger. Mycoplasma bovis, in terms of bulls, the natural mating element, whilst there's still a lot of natural mating that's gone on, that element has reduced.
Yeah.
So again, where you're in an A/B environment and you need to identify what that optimal window is, obviously, technology is a key driver for that. But then you also have, as we've just touched on earlier, certainly around health, and obviously healthy animals are more likely to get pregnant. So there's a massive piece of that technology around health management, and they use the throwaway line that we know she's sick before she knows she's sick.
Yeah.
And in an environment with the technology where you're looking at the two correlating points are activity and eating and rumination. So you're looking at those 2 points. Now when one of those drops for whatever reason, it's giving you an indication, and usually that will be that will be well in advance of her actually being sick. So whether it be metabolic sort of ketosis, whether it be mastitis, the technology has the ability to give you a warning when those illnesses are about to pull through.
You've touched on mastitis here. We've done a couple of herd screens lately on some cows in Tokoroa, and the staph positive cows were as high as the 30% of the empties. So, obviously the technology is not going to tell you it's staph, but then the next step is to go and test those cows, because you could be wasting A, time, B, semen, everything. So I think, we've got to look at what we're not looking at is the broader picture, and, I remember when 6% empty was a common figure. Then it was 12, then people were horrified at 14. I don't know what the national average this year will be, but I think last year it was around that 17%. That's an awful lot of wasted cows, basically.
It's an awful lot of wasted cows, but it's also an awful lot of resource that's been wasted as well. And if you can overlay, again coming back to that plan and looking at some of the really great products that are out there. We've got sexed semen, we've got short gestation semen, all things which can tighten that calving pattern and really try and reduce some of those inputs. And I suppose the other element of that technology as well is skilled labour or guys that are looking to move farm are now looking to farms with technology and saying, well, that's actually a farm I want to work on. There's something that I want to be involved with. So it's about attracting that right calibre of labour as well.
Well, you're looking at let's say calving in August, mating through till February. People tell me they farm for the lifestyle. I've got to ask the question, should they be looking at other things to make life easy? And, obviously one of the barriers you're going to come up with in your role is it's too expensive. It's cost inhibitive. We come across that as well, but surely the benefits, if you weigh them up, always outshine the initial outlay.
Absolutely. And I think if you again look at a couple of those key points, especially in regards to the heat detection technology, identifying that optimum window for insemination, and then overlaying that with again some of those genetics offerings out there, again you are just pulling everything a lot tighter. You're reducing the time frame. But even when we come back to labour, if we were just talking about the lack of skilled labour out there in regards to picking heats, which then becomes reliant on one person. But even if you've got one skilled person or one person that's there, they still need a break. They still need some time off. So what happens when they're taking time down? And in a lot of environments and a lot of conversations we're having with farmers is that you're either getting someone that's essentially trying to work right through, and then they're getting tired and essentially missing some of those key moments to make a decision. Either that, or when they do take downtime, then it's left to someone potentially less skilled, and then again you have this lack of accuracy around picking those heats.
I guess they get put in a position where they don't take time off. And then, as we've seen on a recent TV program, burnout. So I think, with the way everything's going, with the minimum wage, with the lack of staff, where COVID's affected bringing staff in from overseas, I always remember an ad saying, say goodbye to tail paint, which offended me a little bit because I sell tail paint.
Yep.
And I don't think we can, say, because tail paint has been proven is for heat detection and things like that. But we need to broaden our horizons and look outside. That's my feeling anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I'd agree. And we certainly see it when, you've got a farm that hasn't been exposed to a lot of technology, and they make that call. They make the jump and say, okay, we're going to do something different. We're going to adopt this technology. They go down that path, but they need the confidence. They need to have the confidence in the technology. It's easy from a sales perspective to say, it'll be fine. Just crack on with it. We see the results across hundreds of farms. We're confident with it. But again, this is his farm. This is his or her investment.
Yeah.
So, in those environments, often you will get someone that will still use tail paint, and it's fine to have that secondary bit of, I suppose, confidence build until such time as they get to a point where actually this is doing a really great job, and especially around some more of those silent heats or standing heats where you're not going to get a heavy rub, or it might just be the proverbial sort of head movement over the tail, and that's where technology, I suppose, will start identifying a lot more of those passive heat events, and again, just trying to get that accuracy window as tight as what we can.
Well, Craig, I think we've covered most things. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or I just, to me, all the tools are there, from tail paint to technology. Yeah. And I don't think we should be afraid of any of it.
No.
To me, a 17% empty rate would sort of make me look. Maybe we should look at our acceptance of what we're accepting now.
Yep.
Maybe more so. I don't know. That's just my view. I know there'd be a lot of people that disagree with me. Yep. But I also know a lot of farmers that pull their hairs at 12%. So.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at that, the wider technology influence, it's also understanding it's not a silver bullet.
No.
And there still are some basic tenets of animal health and that are just massive drivers in terms of mating success. So I suppose I don't want to understate those elements of what mating success would look like. But then I if I put my sort of passionate herd management hat on, it's all of the other elements that it brings as well. So, obviously heat detection we've covered in this discussion, the animal health ability to then, essentially draft off an animal based on a health alert. Again, you're not having to try and pick that animal out, and because you're getting an early indication, there's an animal of interest essentially, which is drafted and waiting in a holding pen for you. So there are these elements of efficiency, of labour saving, which the technology will bring to the table, and then when you start overlaying that back against your full herd management package, and looking at how many days since her last cycle, calving days in milk, and certainly down a milk sensing environment where we start looking at getting really detailed around feed to yield and really sort of punching that protein envelope, that is where the technology again and some of that adoption practices can really start giving you a really strong return on investment.
Well, I think if we, I'm finishing probably, if we see the trend of herd sizes becoming smaller, we've got to be more emphasis on production and making the best out of those cows. So. Hey, Craig, thanks for your time today. Love your passion. It's always good to talk to you. And thanks for tuning in. Okay. We'll see you next time.
Thanks very much, Pete. Cheers.
Thanks for tuning in to FIL Your Boots. If you'd like to learn more about the topics covered in today's episode, talk to your local FIL manager or head to fil.co.nz.